Hi, this is Mimi.
And this is Lee. In this episode of Beyond Dieting, we are continuing our discussion on tapping by reviewing the book, The Tapping Solution by Nick Ortner.
Yep. Here I have, if you're watching us on YouTube, I have the book.
Yes.
The Tapping Solution, a revolutionary system for stress-free living. That is definitely a title that was like, yes, please.
That's a really good title, really good subhead on that.
Mm-hmm.
So who is Nick Ortner? I've been following Nick Ortner for a long time. I was trying to think back to when I first heard of him. And I think it was, I don't know, I want to say like 2008 or 9. I don't know what he was up to in those years, but it seems like I knew about him pretty early on through Hay House or something. When did you first hear of tapping?
Probably when you and Carolyn were teaching it to me in 2018, maybe 20.
Yeah.
Like I'm definitely not in the 2000 and aughts like you were.
Right. Yeah. So
And I was like, we kind of talked about it last time, but I was very slow into the adoption of tapping as a tool in my self-care toolbox.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are hesitant about it because it can seem complicated, which we'll get into. And we talked about this in last week's episode, but Nick Ortner is a New York Times bestselling author and creator of a documentary film called The Tapping Solution as well, which I did see. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember it. It was moving though. I remember there were some moving sections of it.
I thought it's very interesting in the book when he talks about making that film and the conversation that they were having about putting the film together and kind of how the team that made the film, was like he and his had been in business with his, I think it was his dad and his brother, and they were in a real estate business when the real estate market tanked. Yes. And they ended up $1 million in debt. And he's like, and I'm still thinking I'm going to make this movie. So it was really interesting how he talked about really leaning into his tapping tools. And it was made by a whole bunch of people that didn't have any experience in making documentary films.
It's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not kidding. So it might be the best way to do it.
Yeah. So why don't you, Lee, just give a quick synopsis of tapping. I know if you want to know all about tapping, we talked about it more in the last podcast, so go back and listen to that. But if you have it, before we start talking about the book, maybe give a brief, what is tapping?
Right. Well, just our interest in tapping is we actually use it now because Mimi is a convert. So we brought her on board and we do use it in our programs now. It's a cornerstone tool for us. But tapping goes back kind of to the 70s. And it's a tool you can use to help you with a wide variety of physical, emotional, and mental challenges. The book goes into a lot of, well, I won't go there yet. We'll talk about the book in a minute. But the method of tapping works on certain acupressure points on your body called meridians. And in that way, it's similar to acupuncture, just without the needles. So it's working on a thousands-year-old kind of medical science from the East, where they use acupressure points. But in this case, you're just kind of using your fingers to lightly tap on the same acupressure points, which are called meridians. And we found it's very effective and fast for a lot of things.
Yeah. And that's probably why people are hesitant, right? It just, one, you are physically tapping all over your body, which just feels awkward.
Yeah. At first it feels like you don't want anybody to see you do it because they'll think you're crazy.
Yeah. And there's so much, I don't want to say controversy, but not everybody believes in the ideas that Eastern medicine have taught us. So I think there's like a, kind of like an ingrained bias about whether that's valid science or not valid science.
Right. I worked in a kind of a alternative medical clinic that was run by a Western doctor. A lot of Western, allopathic doctors worked there, but they brought in different methodologies and practitioners for dealing with pain, especially chronic pain. And so we had one of the best acupuncture doctors in the area, in the United States. Like, people would fly in to see him. And I went to him too, because I was having migraines at the time. So I really was converted by going to him, because he's amazing. And so now it shocks me, though. Like, at one time I was like, ooh, I don't want needles, like, ooh. And it just sounded suspect, because it wasn't what we were used to. But now I'm surprised, because, once I'm converted to something, I'm surprised when somebody else is like, ew, needles.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never done acupuncture, so I'm glad that tapping is, a lot of the same benefits without the needle. And I don't have a fear of needles
Yeah, it
at all.
doesn't hurt. Yeah, the needles don't hurt.
I just have never done it.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, do you want me to walk through the kind of layout of the book?
Yeah, let's go
I can
through
do
the
that.
general layout.
So we're just going to sort of like from cover to end, kind of what's in the book, and then we'll kind of tell you what we took away from it and what we liked. So he starts by really, I love how he talks about how he got involved with using tapping and teaching tapping and really wanting to spread the message of tapping. And then he gives a pretty quick history of the origin of tapping, but I think it's enough that if you don't know anything about tapping, you can understand its roots and how it is rooted in the emotional freedom techniques, EFT. Maybe you've heard that more than you've heard tapping. And he gives like a kind of an explanation of how tapping works, why it's effective, and how it can help in releasing so many things like emotional baggage, overcoming limiting beliefs. But he doesn't just present it in this kind of mystical practice. He gives a lot of scientific evidence to back up its effectiveness. I think lots of scientific evidence throughout the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he kind of dives into the research behind EFT and how, like Lee was talking about, the meridian points and how that influences your brain and nervous system. And then that's what helps reduce the stress, anxiety, and emotional well-being. Like the whole book, I think, is really pushing that emotional well-being. So that's kind of like the setup for it. And then from there, and pretty quick in the book, it gets super practical.
That's part of what I love about it. Also, all the science studies, the scientific studies. And he does go deep enough, like not so deep that it feels dry, but deep enough that you really do understand that this has been studied and proven to be effective in treating a variety of things. And you realize I think anything that's not like you go to the doctor, you get it, a shot, and then they give you a pill, anything that's not that, some people think is mystical. But you really find out this is not mystical at all. This is not woo. This is actually backed up by science. And even if we're not familiar with the medicine of the East, they've been using it for thousands. It's older than our Western medicine, and they've been effectively treating people. We just don't understand it as well if we've just grown up in the United States or something. But yeah, I love the practicality of the way he lays out the chapters and how he presents it. Because you can very quickly, if you just want to start using tapping, you just dive right in. I think it was page 13. He starts explaining, like, here's how you do it.
Yeah. So kind of like there's that whole explanation of it. And then he sort of breaks it up into themes. Each chapter has kind of a different theme or common challenge that we might all face. I think he tried to pick really common themes and challenges, whether it's dealing with fear, past traumas, negative self-talk, physical pain, cravings, financial stress. I hopped right to that one. And in each of these sections, in each of these themes, he's presenting scripts that you can use and people have used to address that theme. And he gives lots of case studies of real people, and he talks about what their challenge was and how they used tapping to overcome that challenge.
Yeah.
And then throughout all of that, in each section, that there's like easy to do exercises and easy to follow tapping scripts. And I would bet if you've got a problem or a challenge that you're facing right now, he's got it tucked somewhere into one of these chapters.
He does. I thought he was very thorough in covering the range of things you can use tapping for. not just for a headache or physical ailments. It's for, really any emotional, mental issue you're having. If you've got anxiety or depression or some traumatic memory. And he says, there's trauma with a big capital T and then trauma with a lowercase t, but anything that's just staying with you. I know I've used it. I have this one reoccurring dream that I won't bore people by going into, but it just drives me crazy because I hate having like a repetitious dream that you just have over and over and over, unless it's like a great dream. But this one's it's not necessarily bad, like a nightmare, but it's just, I don't like having it. It feels like an unresolved issue. So I use tapping to kind of clear whatever that dream is for me. And it was really, I have to say, was one of the most powerful sessions I've done. Like I could feel all the energy moving around my body. I was like, wow, that was an interesting thing to do because it really seemed to do something.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Mimi. Sorry, I cut you off.
I was just going to say, by the time you get to the end of the book, you really have the sense that he sees tapping as something that can transform you individually, but also the world at a global level. Like he feels that this is something that can impact how people, then communities, and then countries interact with each other, at a very different level. Just think of like erasing all of that trauma and stress from the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why I'm so happy we use it as one of our cornerstone tools, because it works in some ways. It's similar to the thought work framework that we use, because he is using in his scripts something that it's not exactly thought work the way we practice it and the way I was taught, but it uses belief systems and thoughts you're having, even about pain, like my head hurts, this pain in my head or whatever, the script will go through beliefs and thoughts that you're having, and then and these are more negative feeling thoughts and beliefs, and you kind of end up disengaging from them as you go through the tapping process. It helps you release it somehow, I think, very quickly. And thought work does too, if somebody participates willingly and wholeheartedly in the thought work, then it can be just as effective at releasing a negative belief. But I think the problem that isn't here with tapping, that is with thought work, is not everybody jumps wholeheartedly into doing thought work because it is work. Tapping to me seems like this, it does seem a bit magical in how quickly it works. So it isn't magical, it is backed by science, but the quickness with which you can move through something seems magical. It's a great shortcut, and it's still very, very effective. It's not like a Band-Aid. It really is working on a very deep level on something.
Yeah. So did you get there thinking about how he structured the scripts?
Did I
get to that connection to thought work by how he structured the script? I did like the fact that the scripts, it's very similar, like the structure with which tapping is done. So seeing that, scripts written over and over, and he gave, he pointed out some variations that you could use. And if, like me, you get hung up on what am I supposed to say next? What am I supposed to say next? He gives some really concrete and easy ways to ease into that process.
Yeah.
If thinking about doing all of that wrong is something that would hold you back from trying tapping. I think in the book, he gives a real, some shortcuts. So
I think that's where he excels, is just the way he presents information is the way I want to absorb it, because he's very practical. He doesn't overcomplicate this process, because I think one person could try to explain this process and it would sound super complicated, maybe even me, I don't know. But I think the way he presents it, it's very, he wants people to think it's simple, and it is once you get it. And so I appreciate how easy he's trying to make it for the people reading the book.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we were going to talk about is, did we think that it was well written and organized?
What do you think?
Like you were addressing
Yeah. What do you think, Mimi?
I think it really was. I appreciated the brevity with which he gave the history of tapping, that he gave just enough of the science and the history. So it's like, okay, I believe it. But if I really wanted to go get the science, I can do that type of research on my own. I would imagine most people picking up this book have some kind of idea of what that is. But if you don't, there's enough of that in there without bogging it down and turning it into like a science tome or something that you have to get through. And then how he the chapters were very similarly structured. So, you could hop to, if you're going back to use the book for a specific thing, you can easily find it in there.
Yeah. So I'll just give like a few of the chapters, like the headings. Yeah, I'm trying to find the chapter. Here it is. So yeah, I felt like it was well organized and very cleanly written. We weren't tripping over any extra language. He's very straight to the point.
Very conversational.
He really relates with people very well, and the way he presents information, it just feels like he's right there talking to you. So he goes through like the general healing your body, the general tapping through your past, releasing like those overall things. But then he gets to like losing weight. Chapter 8 is losing weight and letting go of fear, guilt, shame around food. Chapter 9, creating love and healthy relationships. And then 10, making money and achieving your dreams. The next chapter, eliminating phobias and fears. And then he has a general chapter like clearing other life challenges, where he does, a few scripts where you can kind of move along. But he does definitely, he's proselytizing. He wants people to pick it up because he's seen that it's so effective. And if everybody knew about this, wouldn't the world be that much better? Who knows what would happen if enough people picked up this? You don't know until it happens, but I'm shocked by how quickly and well it works. I'm still always kind of impressed over and over again by the way it works.
Yeah. And I thought there was a couple of areas that really kind of stuck out for me. And one of them was in the money. I can't remember, you just said the name of the chapter, but I can't remember what it was, but the abundance thing. And he was tapping because it's interesting. So you think you're going in there and you're just going to be doing tapping around money, but he really starts with, like procrastination and kind of, what's holding you back. And I loved it because to me, one, I'm a goal setter. So I'm always like researching, like, why don't people stick with goals? Why don't I stick with goals? And so we had some really practical steps. And the whole idea from one of the little tapping sections was, what's the next step? And we talk about that a lot in our programs. It's like you can see what the end goal is, but sometimes that end goal really seems far away. And I don't know if I can achieve that. And maybe that's not for me. And you can get in your head about how difficult that journey is going to be. And so he gave a couple of examples of people doing that. And he was like, aha. So the aha is, I only have to know the next step. Like, I don't have to know the whole thing. And like how to tap when you're confused and you don't know what to do and you can't figure out how to reach the goal is you're only tapping to find the next step. So you use it as almost a really practical way of getting into action. So it isn't just, there's a lot in there about relieving stress, relieving pain. And of course that is a sense of stress if you don't know what to do, but I like things that get me into action. So I really was drawn to that section.
Yeah. So using language, he's taking you there through the left brain and the use of language, like through the concept of the next step. And then often what's preventing us from the next step, like I just talked to one of my kids this morning who was like really overwhelmed by how messy her living space had gotten. And so we were talking about overwhelm, and you just have to start with one thing, but sometimes you're so stressed and overwhelmed by the big thing, it's hard to know where to start, when really you just have to almost put on horse blinders and go to one little corner and just start, picking stuff up. So, but what he's also doing with the tapping is it works on the limbic system and the amygdala, and it starts to, that's the part of your brain that wants to run away or freeze. It's the, fight or flight syndrome. And then there are more F's in there. Now they've broken it down into more F's, but so while you're using language to clarify, you're also calming down your limbic system.
Yeah, that's good. Trying to think of what some of the other key things that was in there. I got some. This was in an earlier section when he was talking about perspective and shifting perspective, and that often we're looking for the quick fix. Like, oh, this is the situation I'm in, and I want this situation changed. And that's not necessarily going to be the quick fix. And so he's talking about how what you can do, though, and through the use of tapping, and of course he gives scripts to do it, is change your perspective. So instead of feeling that this situation is hopeless, or I'm always like this, or here I am again in a repeating pattern, that if you can start to shift your perspective, it opens up, doorways and avenues that you might not have seen as possible before. So that whole starting to change how you view something. A situation is a situation.
Right.
And
We
obviously
actually
you can
do
change
that. Yeah, without having read his section on that when we did it, we actually, when we wrote our scripts for our program Beyond Dieting, we did that. We started with the, you're supposed to start with kind of the limiting belief or the negative thought that's holding you back. And in our scripts, we did that. We went from negative, then kind of neutral, and then we started to move toward like, what if this could be a little bit better than you first thought? And, not trying to jump into like unicorns and rainbows, but just shifting perspective, exactly what you just said.
Yeah. And I like how he was, you can't rush into the betterness.
No.
That,
Not with some things. Yeah.
if you're tapping and you're still struggling, it's hard to get the perspective change.
Yeah. It depends on what it is. Some situations are way worse and stickier than others. And some people are more traumatized than others. The level of anxiety or the level of trauma or the level of depression could just be greater than someone else's who could more quickly tap through something. And so it's good to respect that. And I think he's good about making a case for that. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably sounds like we're just like pro Nick, and I would say I am, because I've been following him for so long. I think he's a good guy, and I like his values, and so I know a lot about him. Like I took a program with him I hadn't read the book, but I had taken a different program with him a long time ago. So I'm familiar with it, but I definitely learned a lot. Even though I'm so familiar with it, I learned a lot reading it, which I always appreciate,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, reading personal development books, because if you are reading like this about tapping, something that you are already a believer in, like it's we can be pro Nick Ortner, but we also are pro tapping. So what this is doing is reinforcing something that we already practice and helping us take it to a different level, a higher level, or just, sometimes you do things and it's like, well, it's working. I'm good. I'm just going to keep doing it. So it was really good for me. I had never read the book or known much about him other than like, I knew he was one of the gurus in the tapping space. So I had heard his name, but it's like, I mean, I don't know necessarily that I'm Nick Ortner, because to me, he just still is an author, but I'm definitely pro tapping, and his book and the way he structured it just reinforced my belief for that and gave me new tools to use.
Yeah. I definitely, I did a lot of writing in the margins and earmark, pages so that I can go back. So it's going to be a useful tool for me, because we do use it in our program. So it's nice to have somebody who's really knowledgeable explaining it so clearly. And it's interesting with self-help books, sometimes like you can get that kind of confirmation bias where like
Yeah.
I'm already a believer in tapping, but I've had the experience of reading or listening to, because I do a lot of reading on Audible, self-help books where you would think I would have confirmation bias because they're talking about something I already use, a tool or concepts I already know about. But then some people, they start talking about their view of it and the way they do it. And it's just like nails on a chalkboard. And I'm like, oh, I can't even listen to this anymore. I can't even read this anymore because I don't like how they're approaching it. And definitely with this book, I didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah. I thought his writing style was very inviting.
Yeah.
And it kind of moved along.
It moved. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that Lee and I always like to think about was like, because it is a personal development book, is it also entertaining? Like we want the information out of that, but we also want it to be entertaining. And I think he did a pretty good, I mean, it wasn't like entertaining, like, ha ha ha, this is this is such a laugh a minute. But I think it was like engaging enough that you kind of kept going through it. There definitely were some of the, like, I've never really used tapping for physical pain. So I just kind of like bounced through that section a little bit because of the structures, I think to me, it's more like a resource that I can go back to for that section. Like, nice to know that that's a possibility, right? So just like if you didn't want to work on money in abundance, you might not dive into and read every word of that section. But I think because there are case studies and real people and their stories are kind of engaging. I personally thought maybe there was a little too many of those.
I did too. That was one thing where, I mean, normally I think books could use more.
Yeah.
And I think he needed them in the beginning, like, especially with the guy who originally developed, got the aha light bulb moment, the Stanford guy. I'm forgetting his name right now, but he was the guy in the 70s. He was an engineer and had a client who was struggling with water or something. I don't know. That story was very compelling because that was one of the first ones he threw out there. But I would agree that at some point I didn't need as many. So I kind of skimmed through those.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the exercises. I love the tapping scripts. I take it. I've been taking it out with me in the mornings when I do my journaling and have my tea. I'm like been using different scripts that he has, and then Lee has written scripts for us, and using those. I don't know why I just like to read along with the script.
It makes it so seamless. You don't have to stress about what, the whole point is to get past the amygdala and shut it down and not have it like get in your way as a roadblock. So if you are somebody who's going to be stressed about what do I do next? What do I do next? Then just to read those scripts, you're just like, phew, I don't have to think about that.
Yeah. Because I find if I don't have a script, like, oh, I'm just going to do this myself. I'm like, just like, so what's my eye? What am I going to say that? What am I going to say at the next place? What am I going to say at the next place? And so like, instead of like just kind of sinking into it, that's just me personally. And then
I think that probably a lot of people would feel that way. I mean, it's like performance anxiety for self-help.
Yeah, that's interesting because he had that concept, he brought it up a couple of times in there, like the upsides and the downsides. Like, I like that because you often think like something that you want to tap on. So let's just say it is losing weight. So you think like, okay, that's what I want. You're tapping on, like trying to, what's holding me back and getting into a positive space about it. And then it's like, for something, if you can't quite get there, like what is this limiting belief I had? And him talking about it might be you're hung up on what the downsides are. And you're like, is there a downside to losing weight? And that might be where your limiting belief is. It's like, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but oh my gosh, if I lose weight, I just might be too sexy. People think.
But people do that. There's
like this get in my head, like this might be
Yes.
too good. I know people do it with money a lot, like I work with do more work with money, but this idea of what if I am successful? Like, what if this project does work out? And so I liked him like thinking about like what's blocking you might not be the negative thing that you think, but it might be the upside. And he brought that, kind of wove that through a couple of different sections. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he does this whole tapping tree thing, which I think he cites who came up with it. He didn't come up with it, but he puts it in here and cites the women who did come up with it, where you're really exploring and trying to go those deeper layers down to the roots of the limiting beliefs. And sometimes it's a surprise what that limiting belief is. It's not what you first think it's going to be.
Yeah. And then he had that in the healing the body section. He came back to that whole tree thing again with creating your healing tapping tree. And I was like, oh, this is going to take some thought. Like I've got that page in that section marked, because this idea of, the leaves or the side effects and that kind of stuff. That I think, like, if you have something that you're really stuck on, did you pull up the woman's name? Sorry, I was started.
Yeah, I've got it marked. I've got a ton of things marked, but let me see.
Here it is. I just found that page.
Oh, good.
Lindsay Kenny.
Yes.
Lindsay Kenny. Just because since he attributed it to her, I want to attribute it to her too.
Yeah.
But I think like if I come across a problem that I'm super stressed or super stuck at, to go through that process of, what are the leaves? What is the root? What is my trunk on this thing? It was a really interesting concept that she came up with.
Yeah. And that's what made me think it's such a mirror image of thought work starts with the limiting belief. You try to start with a limiting belief, which here you're almost working from the other end of the tree. Like you're starting with symptoms, which is fascinating, because I think in thought work, sometimes if you're really coaching it well and someone's really like the client is really just flowing with it, you can get those symptoms. Like they start talking about their bodily symptoms or the way they behave, the behavioral symptoms. That's when all of this is at its best, is when you can figure out all the pieces of what they put on this tree.
Yeah. I think it was the idea that often what you're tapping on is the symptom, because that's what you see as the problem, right? And then that leads you through to all the other stuff. Yeah, I thought that was great imagery, and how he talks about pulling that out. But I was like, that's not one of the quick and easy things. Like that.
No.
I need to give me a blank tree. We need to make a graphic of a tree so that we can start to tease that out. But then it becomes kind of like a puzzle, it seems.
Yeah, that one's going to take some time for people. And then I think it's better if they get into tapping. I don't know. You never know how somebody's going to pick up something easiest, but that I was like, well, I love it. I love that tree, but I don't know if I would throw that at somebody first.
No, I was like, oh, I got it. I kind of read through it. I'm like, that's really cool. And then when he would bring it up later, I was like, okay, I'm starting to get a little clarity about it, but that would be not just reading the book through. Like that would have to come back. I do think it's one of the things Lee and I talk about when we have books too, is what are the nuggets of gold. I think that concept is, for me, one of the nuggets of gold is this symptoms and behaviors and what it is, but it's a nugget that I'm going to have to go mining for a little bit, I think.
Oh, I know. One thing that really made me just go, wow, in the book was when he was talking about people researching it. And of course, I should have this name ready, but you guys just have to read it. But there's a scientist in China, I believe, unless it was South Korea, and I apologize to this person. But she actually found these microscopic tunnels that, because the main thing with Western medicine is like, well, we don't see it. You can't prove it. Where is it on the body? Like these meridians, so-called meridians, like point to it. It's not like pointing to an elbow. And she actually found these little microscopic tunnels that run down the meridians, like right where these points are. They're there. Like she actually found the physical evidence for them. So it's not some woo conceptual thing. They're actually there in your body, like you're wired with them,
Yeah.
which, that is the premise of it. But, Western medicine needs to see a picture of it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
she-
I mean, I appreciate all the science that's being poured into the brain and the gut and what's happening on the nervous system, and the vagus nerve, and how stress cortisol for menopausal women, is such a detriment to losing weight.
Mhm.
And, thinking that you're beating yourself up on CrossFit
Yeah.
is going to help you lose weight, and it's doing the opposite. It's like, I appreciate that dollars are being turned that way, and that more people are opening up to not just take a pill.
Yeah. To looking at it, that science is, at least somebody's invested in looking at some alternative pathways and really helping women with women's issues. That's a whole other topic. That's really what we deal with, dieting, because we're looking at these things from the perspective of, women over 50. So, these methods, that alternative methods for helping with these things, like the stubborn weight gain after menopause, is very much appreciated.
Yeah. So were you inspired? Did you find this?
I was. Well, we're writing a book. So I was really inspired by the way he organized this book and how cleanly he imparted the information. I was inspired as a writer of a book, by the way he did this. So I'm definitely inspired to kind of have this on the side as a study guide for how to
like a structural model for how a personal development book should be written.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of a good one.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, well, just along that same vein, I do love how I felt like he was in a conversation with me. He'd be like, "Hey, you made it this far," like I definitely felt like he was talking to me. But I also think that just the breadth of what tapping can do and how he presented that, and the ease with which he's made it accessible, I found that very inspiring. So,
Yes.
and I thought, for somebody that is hesitant about tapping or questioning about tapping, I would feel comfortable recommending this book.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think he didn't sound super woo. Like, he sounded like a very grounded, person, and he was open about what skepticisms there might be there and why you shouldn't do it anyway. So, like,
yeah, he totally presents as the guy next door, which I think he authentically is, but he definitely presents as just the average guy next door. There's nothing woo about him or, off-putting in any kind of way. He just is like the nice guy next door kind of person. We have our review system. Since this is the first book we reviewed on this podcast, you may think that we're like easy reviewers and we're just going to give a free pass to everybody. But I mean, in our feather system, instead of thumbs up or thumbs down, we're going to grant feathers on a scale of 0 to 5. And Mimi gets to vote hers. I get to vote mine. We may not always agree, but I give this, for a self-help book, I give it 5 feathers.
Oh, I was going to say, I give it 4 feathers. I did find that some of the stories were just too long and too many.
Yeah. If you want Mimi's attention, you got to move along. You got to
get me into action. What am I going to do? Let me get into action. Like, I believe it. Like, once you've convinced me, I believe it. So let's just get into it. But definitely, 4
go ahead.
I would strong.
4 feathers. Yeah.
4 feathers.
4 feathers. I give it 5 because usually my complaint about a book is they don't do enough case study. And so I can't complain now that he gave me too many. I've got to be satisfied with the fact that he did present them. And
you like a good index.
I love a good index. He's got a good index. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, 5 feathers from me.
Yeah. And then we like to try to pick at the end of each podcast just a song that pops into our mind when we think about what we've been talking about in this podcast. And so we chose Changes by David Bowie, because I just feel like
Changes.
tapping is getting you into that, like tap, 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 tap,
Changes. Yeah.
You know, that it really is to try, it's getting you to shift. It's getting you to leave something behind and butterfly into something new.
Yeah, even if you don't read this book, you've got to try tapping. But I think it helps to have a good guide explain it so that you don't do what one of my daughters did, where she's like, I tried it and it didn't work. And I'm like, well, did you do a script along with it? And she's like, no, what's a script? So like, well, maybe you didn't do it like in its most effective way, but
yeah. No, I just said
just tapped my hand.
tapping all over my body. Well, we have a free tapping series, so you can check that out. And we have a little introduction about tapping, but also you can just follow us along in the visual. So we'll put the link down below.
All right. Well, that was fun, Mimi. I liked reviewing that book.
Yeah, me too. I can talk books endlessly.
Yeah. Bye.
See you in the next podcast.